This is the Smallmouth Crush podcast. If you're a hardcore angler, you've come to the right place. This is a weekly podcast that will interview some of the top smallmouth bass anglers in North America. Travis and his guest will discuss what it takes to consistently catch big smallmouth, and you'll get a glimpse inside the mind of a trophy smallmouth angler. And now, here's your host of the Smallmouth Crush podcast, Travis Manson.
Hello and welcome to the Smallmouth Crush podcast. My name is Travis Manson. Here it is, the final episode in season 1. We did it. A lot of great information. I hope you guys enjoyed season 1. Season 2 will be starting out next week. We're going to actually have a recap of season 1 with Dave Mercer is going to join us. So that's going to be a pretty cool episode for all you out there on the podcast platforms, as well as right here on my YouTube channel, Smallmouth Crush. I certainly appreciate the support all season long. And season 2 is going to be every other week. So it's going to be a great season full of great guests, but just not as crazy from a producing standpoint. It'll be every other week. Same time, 2 p.m. Eastern on Sundays. That'll be uploaded on my YouTube channel as well as all the podcast platforms. So we're going to have another great guest to end this season, another guy that knows how to catch smallmouth. So I am definitely looking forward to speaking with them. But before we go there, so of course, let's talk about The Reel Shot. The Reel Shot has been a sponsor of the podcast all season long, and you guys know the drill by now. They got a lot of great tackle, a lot of great baits, a lot of great everything when it comes to outdoors, and in particular, a lot of great bass tackle. I encourage you, before you make your next tackle purchase, to head on over to The Reel Shot. Use my code SmallmouthCrush15 and get 15% off your first order over at thereelshot.com. All right, let's do it. The wrap up, the last guest in season 1 of the podcast. Bill, how are you doing tonight?
Not too bad. How about you, Travis?
Good. I'm excited to have a conversation with you when it comes to smallmouth, because we fish a lot of the same waters and some of the greatest smallmouth fishing that can be found, I think, in the country. Of course, Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River and that whole upstate New York region. We got it made, man. It doesn't
get
awesome.
much better.
It doesn't. So I want to ask you a bunch of questions when it comes to smallmouth fishing. But Bill, before we get into that, let's allow you to introduce yourself a little bit to the viewers and the listeners that may not be familiar with you, what you're up to, some of the waters that you fish.
Well, my name is Bill Lortz, and I run NY North Country Bassin. It's a guide service. We service Lake Ontario, Oneida Lake, and the St. Lawrence River. And
Nice.
We just target smallmouth.
I know you catch them, man. Anyone, and we'll put the links down below. If you follow your Instagram and your Facebook, you're out there like every day, it seems, man, doing it.
Yep.
How long have you been guiding up there?
I think I just wrapped up my 8th year. So
Sure.
this 2022 will be my 9th year.
Wow. And there's just so much to it when it comes to smallmouth fishing. It's interesting. You do the Great Lakes, the big bodies of water, Lake Ontario, and then of course you have Oneida. That's a lot. It's a lot going on. They're both great fisheries. What's your favorite? Where do you prefer to fish?
I like them all.
Do you?
I mean, there isn't one particular favorite. I mean, Oneida, I like the numbers at Oneida, but you don't have that opportunity for a fish of a lifetime like you do
Sure.
up here, up in, St. Lawrence and Lake Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started off, I did a lot more at Oneida than I do now. Now I only do Oneida during the catch and release season because we don't have that season up here. And then once the season starts up here, the 3rd Saturday in June, then I'm up here full time for this is, the river and Lake Ontario is the only place I guide.
Okay.
It's just too much to keep my head around.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. For those that are not aware, there's actually a closed season, unfortunately. It depends how you look at it. There's 2 counties, Jefferson and St. Lawrence County, where you cannot target fish. You can't even really be out there until the 3rd week in June, the 3rd Saturday, I guess, in June. Some of the other sections of Lake Ontario, you can fish. And it's pretty unique because all the other Great Lakes are pretty much open, to my knowledge, which allows for a lot of opportunities. Unfortunately, when it's a closed season like that, we got to go somewhere. And so you choose to spend a lot of your time on Oneida. How is that time of year?
Oneida in May is just absolutely amazing. I mean, you can get into the pre-spawn for the first half of May, and then you're into the spawn, and then even touching on some of the post-spawn, into end of June, well, just before the season starts.
If someone was to, go out there and want to catch a bunch of smallmouth, what's a good type of pattern when you're in that early time frame? Let's say early May, before the spawn. Where does one even look? Because there's so much structure on Oneida. If you look at a map and look at all the different humps and the different points and all the places where you would think a fish would be, how are you breaking that body of water down and being able to put your clients on fish like that?
The biggest thing you have to do is just throw some kind of search bait. I like to throw a swim bait that time of year, and they'll hit it. And then you just kind of start working from there in those areas that you caught them, and then duplicate it further and further. I mean, we're just targeting shallow rock and that first break outside of a spawning cove. I mean, it's bass fishing 101. There's a lot of it.
Right. Yeah, it's endless. So as far as targeting them with a swim bait, what's your approach with that? What's your favorite swim bait, and how are you fishing that typically during that time of year?
Pretty much predominantly used all Kitex. And I like the 3.3 or the 3.8. Beginning of the season, I'll start off with the smaller one. If the water's still really cold, I'll stick with just a regular swing impact, not the fat. And I just put it on a jig head, like a 3/16 jig head, and just slow roll it around.
I guess it's almost the same size as a 3.8, right? But it's a skinnier version. And you're using that specifically when it's a little bit colder water temps?
Yep. It just has a tighter wobble to it. It's more subtle. And those fish, when the water's cold, they seem to react to that a little bit better.
What type of colors you have the most success in? They come in so many different. I mean, I know Oneida has a lot of perch. I know it has a lot of bait fish, even gobies too.
I'm not a real big color guy. I mean, I'm more of a shade, so I'll go with like shad shades or else perch shades, and that's not just for Oneida. That's everywhere all year long. Anything that looks like a minnow, silver flash, gold flash, bluegill flash. Those are probably three of my better colors that I use. And I mean, I started using a bunch of different colors this year just because of not being able to get stuff from Kitech, kind of forced me to use some other colors. And I kind of tripped and fell on a couple other colors. One was, I think it was Super Shad, was another color that was really good this year. I mean, light colors, dark colors. And that's typically like a shad color is more your lighter colors. And then your darker colors are more your perch colors, like your IU, actually they have perch color, but IU is another good one for that too.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you mentioned bluegill flash, and it's an amazing color for smallmouth. It's definitely different when it comes to the shad patterns that you see in a lot of swim baits. That little bit of blue fleck just really seems to drive those smallmouth crazy, and I don't know why. I can't wrap my head around it, but it works. You're absolutely right when it comes to that color.
They all work. I mean, I got a buddy of mine that all he throws is gold flash. I mean, he throws gold flash all the time. And if he gets sick of it, he turns it over and then he's got flash gold.
Right.
If he gets sick of throwing the same color. So he's won a lot of money on that color.
Interesting. So throwing a swim bait, what are some other baits that you're going to utilize during that time frame?
I've been throwing Ned rigs too a lot. And I kind of found this one by, it's got a Ned spin. I get them from that Sammy John Jigs. Like for me, because I can't just let it sit there, I got to hop it a little bit. And that blade on there seems to really help me out. My clients catch them on it too.
So a little jig head. So I'm picturing a Ned rig with a little arm or a little attachment that has a small willow blade, right?
Yep. It's just off the backside of where the hook comes out. With that blade on there, it just kind of helps me anyways catch fish, and in turn, it gives my clients confidence if I can catch them too.
Right.
And then just fishing around for myself, it's something that I feel that really helps me out.
So Oneida has, over the last couple of years, it seems like Oneida has really come on strong. You mentioned trophy fish, but for a lot of people, there's trophy fish in their eyes right living in Oneida. There's some heavy fish that
Yeah.
just seem to be getting bigger and bigger. And I think a lot of that has to do with the bait. I know there's some gobies in there now. Is
Mhm.
do you feel the same way? Why they're getting bigger is because of the gobies?
Yeah, it's because of the gobies, but gobies, I don't think will ever be a true, I don't want to say problem, because I mean, you fish up here, they're not a problem. They just make the fish swell up. But
Right.
in Oneida, the gobies cannot get away from predatory fish. In Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes, they can. So they can get out, and let's just call it 100 feet, for example. Okay, once they get out to that 100-foot mark, the number of predatory fish that are going to be down there to feed on them is minimal. The gobies can never get away from predatory fish in Oneida Lake, like they can in Lake Ontario, in any of the Great Lakes. So they're never going to get as predominant as they are in Lake Ontario. I mean, you see the shad bite still, and the perch bite still very strong at Oneida. And that up here, and I hope you understand, I'm just kind of referencing Oneida versus Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. Those bites, while, sometimes a perch bite is good up here, but at Oneida, it could be good all year round. And that's just because they're not totally focused on the gobies.
I remember back in the day on Oneida, especially later in the year, I guess later than you fish now, being that you really targeted in that early season, there used to be tons of fish where you'd be able to catch them busting, you'd be able to follow the birds. And that bite for me just hasn't developed much anymore. I'm sure there's still a time and
definitely
place.
fallen by the wayside.
Has it? Yeah.
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 I mean, it all started, gosh, I'm trying to think now how long ago it was. Probably, I'm going to say 15 years ago or so. The lake actually flooded to the point where they closed it. And as a result of that happened right during the shad spawn. So as a result of it being so high, the shad spawn was absolutely incredible. And that went for probably about 7 years. Wow. Where they got on that kind of a bite. And this is all pre-goby. So that lesson, the gobies came on a little bit stronger. And I mean, the size of the rock bass you catch at Oneida Lake in the spring is insane. And that's because they're just feeding on gobies now. Yeah. You can catch them right along with smallmouth. We got one group of guys that we make multiple passes down through an area just to catch these rock bass.
They're that big. Yeah, that's fun.
They're like pound and a halfers.
Sure. Incredible. Yeah.
And it's fun.
That lake itself, it's a fish factory. I mean, there is so much bait, there's so many fish, and the numbers is crazy. Let's head up to Lake Ontario, the St. Lawrence River, and talk to me about that place. I mean, once you get a taste of that and some of those trophy fish, I'm sure for your clients being able to catch those giants. I mean, 5-pounders is pretty common nowadays out there.
Yeah.
And it's like nonstop. It's like there's so many, and it doesn't matter really where you go. You can catch that bag in the river. You can catch it out in the lake, all the way down, throughout the whole system, it seems. When you start fishing Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, once it opens, you're pretty much hitting, I guess, the tail end of the spawn. What are you targeting? What are you looking for that time of year?
We have a fragile fishery up here. I try to stay away from bed fishing the best I can, especially when you get a couple of clients in a boat. It seems like, if you post up on one fish, then one guy's trying to catch a fish and the other guy is just kind of casting around trying to pick up scraps in the back. And for the most part, if we do some of that, they all work together, but there's always that competitiveness on the boat. And I mean, you've had people on the boat, so you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
So I try to stay away from that. So I'll target. Usually there's still some pre-spawn fish, and just fish outside of the spawning areas. And then once you get into July, then there's post-spawn fish to be caught.
Right.
The fish that had spawned early. Typically I'm not going to say we don't catch them on beds, because we do. I mean, if you, but I try to do whatever I can to try to steer around it. I think it's better for the fishery. And also, too, if you catch one off of a bed and there's tournament guys around, they're going to see where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they're going to come back and they're going to relocate that fish.
It does get a little challenging, post spawn. And then, of course, you get that summertime and that full-fledged, they can be deep, they can be shallow. I'm curious, what's your take? What's your favorite way to catch them during the summer months out on the Big Lake in the St. Lawrence?
I like to catch them in that mid-range, and when I'm calling mid-range, for Lake Ontario and in the St. Lawrence River, mid-range for me is anywhere from, say, 10 to 25 foot, which is a huge area. And I like to throw a drop shot, or I like to throw a jig.
Throwing a jig around that time can be incredible. I know you have it really dialed in because I know you fish it quite a bit. Walk us through like the ideal way to throw a football that time of year. All that structure out there, and for people that are thinking about heading up there or just taking a look at the map, it's endless. It's endless. Like, where does one even start, and to know to pick up that technique and use it?
Well, we start off by checking the forecast, and that's going to narrow down a lot of water.
Right.
That's how we start.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I basically use that jig in areas where you would use a tube. If you have areas that you're going to use a tube in, I switch to use that jig because I just find I have a better land ratio on that jig than I do a tube. Whether it be in the St. Lawrence in the current or in Lake Ontario, they just seem to jump off a lot. So I switched to the jig. And ever since I've done that, my land ratio has gotten a lot better. When
you're fishing in the river, are you doing a typical drag routine with that? Or are you also making casts and retrieving it? How are you working
at?
A
little of both. It depends on the area. Like if I'm up by Morristown or Ogdensburg area, where I'm fishing right out in the current, then I'm going to be dragging. That are a little calmer, and I can, basically hold the boat. The boat, if you can hold your boat, you don't need to drag it.
In a half ounce, is that a pretty typical size that you're using?
Yeah, I'll use half ounce most of the time, and then if you get shallow or something like that, I'll switch to 3/8.
So, what's your favorite football jig to throw? Do you have a brand that you like to use, and what type of trailers are you normally throwing with that?
I throw just a regular Croix trailer. As for branded jigs, they're homemade.
Okay.
I make them myself, so you lose a lot of them. Yeah, and if you got to buy them, it gets expensive.
Sure. What's your setup? Are you a braid to fluoro? Are you straight fluoro? What do you like to throw when it comes to jigs on the Great Lakes?
Straight fluoro, anywhere from 17 to 20 pound. I mean, if I'm in the river, I may drop down to 14 because of the drag with the current.
Yep.
But I don't really go to braid. I do on my spinning equipment for clients. If they use spinning equipment, then I'll go to braid a fluorocarbon leader.
Okay.
On a spinning rod. But on all my bait casters, it's just straight fluoro for the jig.
And if you're throwing it to help a client, or if they're using a spinning rod with that jig and braid, are you throwing it still a pretty heavy leader as far as fluorocarbon goes? You are?
Yeah,
okay.
Usually 14. I generally will bring my knot right into the spool. So say I'm running a 8 to 9 foot leader, and that's just so that they can break off and I can retie and not have to tie a new leader on.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that if you reel it, if you get the knot so it's in the like 1 or 2 loops into the spinning reel, when you go to cast it out, it slows it down so it ticks them guides just a little bit less than if you started off, between say, the first eye, right around the first eye. Then when you go to cast it, it really puts a lot of pressure on that.
Okay.
Hitting the guides on the way out.
Right.
Because I don't care what kind of knot you do, they're all going to hit the guides.
They do. And you really know, especially with braid to fluoro, when you're throwing the spinning rod and you're throwing those heavier jigs like that, man, I don't care how good you are at tying a braid to fluoro, you're going to sling off a few of those baits every once in a while, especially if you're not checking the knot.
Yeah.
I know we've all been there. So what type of areas are you looking at throwing that as far as that time of year when they're just done with the spawn? You're working a jig, same areas you're throwing a tube, but specifically, what would someone look for? Are you fishing around some grass with that? Are you fishing mainly just real rocky areas, or is there some sand mixed in? What's the ideal setup to
You're
throw
looking
that
for
jig?
that sand and rock mixture, and it's going to be outside of where they spawn, whether it be a point with a good drop off on it. And I'm not saying cast up on the drop and bring it down. I mean, you can always try that, but that's where they're going to stage. I'm looking for staging areas where they're going to be heading out deeper.
What's the deepest you'd fish a football jig out there?
I've caught some in like 35 to 40.
You will throw it there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you got the patience for it, but again, you need to have the right day so it can get down there and you're not blowing all over the place.
Are you moving that pretty quick along the bottom, or is there a kind of a pause and stop?
I generally start off with more of a pulling motion just to kind of mimic dragging it. That's how I'll start. And then if that isn't working, I'll try hopping it, working it a little bit faster. When I say faster, I mean hopping it higher off the bottom, versus slower, which is just a drag on the bottom. And you just got it. Every day is different. I mean, there isn't one particular way. I mean, I start off slower and then work myself faster, and like I tell everybody, you gotta always pay attention to when you get that bite. What were you doing when you get that bite? Because it's my opinion that that's what makes a good fisherman a great fisherman, is somebody when you could sit there and say, well, how'd that fish bite? Well, or what were you doing when that fish bit? And he can go right through and rattle it right off. That's somebody that's paying attention, and that's somebody that can be a great fisherman versus just a good fisherman.
With all the time that you spend up there and on the water daily and putting clients on fish, and you have a good bite and you go back to that same area the next day and they're not there, right? Smallmouth love doing that to us. What are your thoughts? Are you going to stick around in that zone? Are you going to just say, hey, it's not on today? Are you going to go look for something similar? Are you going to run other areas that you've had in the past? What happens when you come across those types of situations?
Yeah. That's $1 million question. It goes through my head just about on every guide trip.
Right.
I just go with my gut. If it ain't working, I don't care. I'll move areas. I mean, I'll even put the boat on a trailer and go to a different landing.
Sure.
Whatever it takes to get these guys bit. That's what it's all about. And I'm not saying I'm going to pull up there and say I was catching them on a drop shot. When I go there again and I'm not catching them on a drop shot, I'm not just going to leave. I'm going to, I'm going to throw a jig at them. I may throw an Ed rig at them, something like that. May move a little shallower, see if maybe they just pulled up shallower. May move out a little deeper. Maybe I'll idle a little bit, see if I could find them. One thing I'm finding is now with some of the technology that's out there, basically a forward-facing sonar, that really tells me if they're there or not. And that's something that, I just got last year and still trying to figure it out. I know you've had it for a while, but that's something that really, I'm not going to say it helps me catch more fish, but it helps me answer that $1 million question.
If they're
Are
there,
they there or aren't they there?
Yeah.
Well, I'll pull the plug and leave. I don't care.
Right. Well, I know you got a lot of experience. You love getting your clients on fish out there. I know you've done well. I know you can put them on the scale as well in some tournaments, man. You brought in some good bags this past season. How do you approach tournament fishing and guiding?
Last year, I only fished one tournament. The only reason I fished it was because I hate to sound cocky, but I knew I was going to win. You were on them. I mean, there's a very strong chance of it. And I've kind of cut out some of the tournament fishing primarily for that reason. That's always a hard thing. Anytime there's a tournament up this way, you always have a target on your back if they know you spend so much time in the water. But at the end of the day, I'm not looking for. I'm always trying to catch big fish for my people, but there's a lot of days where you go out there and you catch 2 and 3 pounders, and we have a riot doing it. Guiding really doesn't help me in tournament if you will. I mean, when I did fish tournaments, I took and I guided right up till practice started, and I'd set aside days for, if you want to call it me time, but I wouldn't guide, if I wanted to practice for 2 days before an event, I didn't guide those 2 days.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's the way I handled it. And it seemed to work out pretty good. Just basically just as if I'm heading out of town to fish a tournament. I'm not going to guide them, so that's kind of the way I looked at it.
I know the one event that you fished last year, you flat out wrecked them. You knew you were going to do well going into the event. So I'm going to have to pick your brain on that. I want you to take me back to that day and kind of walk me through how things went. But before we go there, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to be right back.
You're listening to the Smallmouth Crush podcast. Don't rush out to the water just yet. We'll be right back after this break.
Hey, I teamed up with Beast Coast Fishing to design this killer little jig. Whether you're fishing for smallmouth, largemouth, even spotted bass, this thing is sneaky. Designed with proven fish-catching characteristics, it's a tiny little finesse football jig. It's called the Open Water Sniper. Of course, it's Smallmouth Crush approved. They come in a wide variety of different colors. This one here is Sexy Melon. We got Mothman, Straight Black, Green Pumpkins. So you notice they actually have a few less strands than your standard football jig. No weed guard. You're going to be throwing this the same place you're going to throw an open water, say, exposed hook tube. So anytime you're around that type of structure, it's going to work real well in rocks, hard bottom, and all you're going to be doing is dragging this along. You can do a drag and stop, a continuous retrieve. You can put a little tiny swim bait on the back of that. There's so many different ways you can fish this jig. I've put a TRD on the back of it and looked at them on the graph and dropped straight down and just let it sit there. They're going to hit it. They're going to bite it. The whole point of this jig is to actually emphasize the trailer that you're going to use. So notice the small strands. The hook is very stout. It's perfect. It's got an awesome keeper for your plastics. I've caught so many fish on this year. It will put more fish in the boat. Go check them out. Hey, listen, they got a lot of other great products as well. BeastCoastFishing.com and pick yourself up the OW, Open Water Sniper Jig, Smallmouth Crush approved. All right, Bill, so you knew you were going to do well going into this event. You got to walk me through, like, how, why, how, what went through your mind, and how did fishing go that day of that actual event?
Well, I'm going to totally contradict everything I just said. I found those fish guiding. And we've been, I've been beating on that same school of fish. It was just in Chameau. And I've been beating on that same school of fish for about 2 weeks. I told a couple of guys before the tournament, they were asking me, what they thought I could catch and everything like that. I said, well, if they bite, we'll have 24. If they don't bite, we're going to have 17, 18. Yeah. And the first 5 fish we put in the boat, we had 17 and a half.
Right.
And then, just called up, and I don't know, I think we went to the team tournament. I fished with Dean Meccas. And, it was just the type of thing where, they were there. And then 3 days later, they were gone.
Gone.
And they never showed back up the whole rest of the year.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yep. It's just a shallow rock deal, in that mid-range. Right around that 10 to 15 foot, just a rock drop off. And it was just loaded. I mean, there was perch there. There was gobies there.
So you had the perfect conditions. You went there starting out in the tournament. You knew you were on fish. You had a nice bag right away. At what time did you have your weight? At what point in the day did you know? And did you stay there all day?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we stayed there all day and caught them all day long. It was funny because we had a little electronical malfunction because we used Dean's boat, and had a little electronical malfunction there. So we didn't have a graph from I think it was 10 o'clock on. So we just kind of did the old school triangulation and just kind of fished around. And but we pretty much had, I think we called maybe 2 or 3 more times, but yeah, I think we needed a 4 3/4 to call.
Right.
So when you get up there, you don't call that much.
You mentioned Chameau Bay, and to me, it seems like every section of that lake can almost be broken down to its own body of water. Is it fair to say that Chamois kind of got its mind of its own? You know, it's one of the most well-known bays when it comes to smallmouth fishing on Lake Ontario. Everyone's heard about it. It reminds me almost like Oneida. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. It fishes all about the same depth as Oneida does. You know, a lot of grass and rock mix. Yeah, it reminds me of Oneida too, but the fish are just bigger.
Have you ever got a decent topwater bite consistently on Lake Ontario?
Yes.
You have?
Yep. Used to do it all the time. From about 8:30 at night till dark.
Right?
Yeah. We used to go, I mean, when I first was coming up here and fishing tournaments and stuff, I was staying out with Buddy Steve's, had a place out in Hidden Harbor. And we'd go out and we'd fish our tournaments or pre-fish and everything like that. And we'd come in and, you know, have some dinner and then look at one another and go, let's go see if we can catch a couple on topwater. So we launch a boat there and go right out in front of there and throw topwater around. And I mean, you catch them all the time. But now you go there during the day, nothing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the number one question I get. You know, do you ever catch them on topwater? And, you know, my answer to that is typically, in my opinion, our water is not really always conducive to fishing topwater. You know, once you get that, say 12-inch chop or something like that. I mean, I know a lot of guys catch them in, you know, and I've done it too, but I just lose a lot of confidence when you get any more or just a ripple on the water. You know, and there's very few days you get that out here.
That's one of the biggest things. It's got to be a challenge, you know, guiding every day, having clients come in, being able to put them on fish, because sometimes you can't get to those areas that you want to. And so you have to fall back on plan, you know, B, C, D, and E. And of course, you know, it can be a challenge. I would assume, just like, you know, myself, when I'm out there dealing with the waves and conditions is probably one of the biggest downers, you know, from someone who's coming from out of town, or they plan their vacation a year in advance and this is the week they're coming up to fish, and you know, it blows 15 miles an hour or more every day. That can be real tough. How do you deal with the wind? Do you still try to get out to some of these areas, or do you fall back on a lot of places where you can get clients out of those conditions and still have an enjoyable day?
Yeah, I mean, I try to fish out of the wind, well, out of the rough water best I can. You know, because the one thing, like, we all know what 3-footers are. 3-footers are just, you can fish them, you can run in them, they're fine. You know, it's not the most comfortable, but you can do it. And, you know, that it all depends on who's in the boat with me, you know, what they're comfortable with. Because what I'm comfortable fishing, what you're comfortable fishing, and everybody else is something, could be totally different. You know, and at the end of the day, this is supposed to be fun. They're up here to have a nice relaxing trip, catch some fish, have some fun. You know, bouncing up and down really isn't high on that priority list for them.
Sure.
So I will take and fish Henderson, fish Black River Bay, you know, go into Chamois, go up to the river. I do a lot of fishing up in the river because, you know, you can usually get out up there. You know, now as long as they leave Canadian water open, we'll be good.
When you're forced to go in the river, or, you know, you have a bad wind day, or maybe you just choose to because the bite's on there, what would some advice you could give to the viewers and listeners that want to head out on the river and fish, say, out of Clayton, or, you know, Alexandria Bay or Chippewa Bay? I mean, it goes all the way to, you know, Ogdensburg and, of course, Messina. It's a huge section of the river, guys. It's literally hundreds of miles of fishable water that hold giant smallmouth. What are you looking for when you're fishing the river? Because, you know, there is shallow fish, there's deep fish. What do you prefer to target in that situation? Shallow.
Yep. I like to fish a river shallow. I always like to fish it shallow. You know, I fish a lot of times. I'll fish from that Chippewa Bay up to Ogdensburg area, that section of the river. It just makes sense to me because there isn't a lot of islands. The current flows one way. I mean, you get around Clayton and A Bay and you come around one side of an island and the current's hitting current coming the other direction,
Mm-hmm.
I fish it shallow.
Do you feel like that shallow bite holds up pretty well throughout the season in the river as well? If someone doesn't feel comfortable fishing deep, is there always an opportunity up shallow?
There's always fish shallow in the river, except for maybe August, say mid-August till mid-September. Then you're kind of forced to go out in that deeper water. I mean, you can always catch them shallow, but they're not going to be the bigger fish.
Gotcha. Right.
You're just fishing for resident fish that just live there all their life.
Earlier in the podcast, you mentioned drop shotting was one of your techniques besides the football jig, drop shotting. So what's your favorite setup, and where are you normally fishing that drop shot? Are you fishing that shallow as well as deep? Both?
Yeah. I mean, primarily I use it for deep, but I'll fish in that mid-range. It's very versatile. I mean, you can fish it, dirt shallow to 60 feet deep, just adjust your weight. I generally, use a 3/8 ounce weight, and then if I have to go to half, I will. That's usually the two weights that I usually use.
What type of baits are you throwing on a drop shot more often than not?
I've been throwing a lot of that max scent, but, it just it seems like everything kind of goes in spurts. I mean,
it does, Well, that max scent was hard to get a hold of for a lot of guys last year. I know it's special. There's something about it, whether it be, obviously, I think it's more the scent than anything, because I don't know if you've ever looked at it underwater. It doesn't look like much to me, but they love it.
Not good at all.
No, but it works, and it works good on a lot of different applications. I know guys that try to fish it like a Ned rig. I know guys I've put it on the back of a football jig, like a finesse football jig, and even worked it around. But there's something about it. It's probably the number one bait on the Great Lakes right now. I'm sure you remember when gulp used to be the thing, and it still is a great bait as well. When things get real tough and you really got to dial it in, and they're there, and you're just not getting bites, what is like the bait of choice or the technique that you're going to go to try to get those?
I'm probably just going to drop shot for them.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're in that mid-range, if they're shallow, I mean, I could throw a swim bait, I could throw a hair jig, any variety of things at them. Just see what you get them to range when I can't see the fish. I'm gonna stick with a drop shot. That would be my go-to.
So there's two questions I always ask everybody on this podcast, and we've been doing it now for 52 episodes. So I'm gonna have to ask you. Well, first of all, I want to know what's your personal best smallmouth up there?
7.86.
Nice.
Yep.
What'd you catch him on?
Blade bait.
Bait. Nice.
Everybody.
Hold on, you cut off right there for some reason. There was a glitch.
There's a reason for that.
We didn't even talk about blade baiting. We should. You might not want to, but I'm going to ask you a couple questions when it comes to blade baits. I know it's an effective technique. It works great. A lot of guys really love using it in that colder water. I know you do too, but do you ever use it just during the summer months at all? Because I know we've had a few guys, and that's one thing I want to get better at in the future is throwing the blade bait during the summer months.
I'll try it I generally throw it in the spring and then in the fall. I haven't really thrown it much in the midsummer in that warm water. I mean, there's guys that throw those, what are they, steel shads?
Yes.
I cast them and reel them in like a crankbait.
Yeah.
I can't get my head wrapped around that.
No, I want to, because I know that we've had some, especially the Lake Erie guys, they love throwing that steel shad. And I got to think it would work. So what is your blade bait of choice?
I've got a guy in PA that makes me the blanks. I just run just a number 5 treble hook on it. That seems to be the best size for me, with split rings. And I mean, it's not a very complicated setup,
It's a fun bite for me. The reason why I like a blade bait is it's just something different. We've been drop shot, we've been dragging, we've been fishing the tube all year. You get into the fall months, and now you can really, especially, it seems like they really like to group up. So when you do find them, you can get them going on that blade. You said you didn't fish a whole lot in the summer. What water temps are you going to start really keying in on a blade bait?
I like to see water temps in the 50s, but I mean, if it's in the 60s, I'll try it, especially if the days are shorter. I go by length of day that time of year more so than water temperature. It's just, I've kind of just started fishing that way, fishing more length of day over water temperature solely. Most of the time they coincide. This year, the water temperature never heated up and then it wouldn't cool down. So, I run right to the end of October and the water temperature was still in the 60s.
Crazy.
At the end of October.
There's no 2 years the same when it comes to fishing out there. I don't know if you remember a few years ago how hot it got during the summer months and how hot that, and sometimes, in my opinion, those fish, they just didn't like to be in that particular temperature range. It was a little difficult for me, especially when you get those really hot summer days without a lot of wind. And I think it has something to do with the thermocline, but it seems like these fish just roam more or maybe went out deeper. And the problem I have when you start getting really deep is there's not the structure to hold them. So you can't target them. You know what I mean? Like they really disappear on you under those situations, but it's always either low water or a high water year, or you got something crazy. There's no consistency. Yeah.
It's been all over the board.
No consistency.
Hopefully they just leave it alone and let nature take its course.
Right.
So you get back to normal. Like this year in particular, out to like Stony and Glue was just, it was not happening this year. Not like it has in years past,
No, I agree.
I mean, they were there in the early season and then they're gone. I really think that, they're on the structure, then they're off the structure. I think those fish are just out suspending and they pull in and they feed. And if you're there when they're there, then it's magic. And if you're not, well, then, you catch 12-inch fish.
All right, Bill, I'm going to give you one bait to use next season and one bait only. What is that bait going to be? You can't use anything else. What's the bait you have the most confidence? A jig. Yeah. I figured. 1/2-ounce jig. We're gonna take it a step further then. I bet you're gonna say green pumpkin. What color?
Yes.
Green pumpkin. Yeah. I ask that to everyone. I really want to know what is like the ultimate confidence bait over the course of the whole season. I want to say almost a tube is number one. Maybe a Ned rig. A lot of people said drop shot with some type of drop shot bait, of course. And we had a lot of swim bait guys as well. But I think it's what you have confidence in. When you're out there and you're around these fish, just like you, I can tell that you would love nothing better than having a jig bite, right? I mean, there's nothing like it. It's a great bite. It works. But having that confidence and just knowing you're out there every day, you're basically trying to get your clients on fish on a consistent basis, and you know what works. And for you, it definitely sounds like the jig. And make sure you're around fish, and that's the biggest thing. Now, finding them, that's a whole nother story, of course. I think a lot of it's time on the water for you, right?
Oh, yeah. You just go, you just start off, and like a great example is the beginning of our season. I go out one time before the season just to check water temperature and see where the fish are and everything like that. And I know, okay, well, I can move out to this edge and catch them. So if I have the time, I'll go out there one day. And then, once the season starts, I'll be on the water for, 30, 40 days in a row with 1 day of preparation, and all I'm doing is just going off of where they've historically been. And that's just time on the water.
What's your favorite part of your job? Being out there every day. Obviously, you're on the water, you're out catching fish, but what do you enjoy most about guiding up there?
Meeting everybody. Meeting all the people. You get such a wide variety between, very novice fishermen and very experienced fishermen. And when you get a novice on the boat and they listen to you and do everything you say, and it works, you're like they think you're a god, because they've never experienced something like that before, and they generally listen, but I also like to experience fishermen too. And I just like meeting the people and talking to them.
If you're looking at fishing with a guide, is paying attention to what they say and trying to duplicate what they're telling you, because you like yourself, you had the experience. You've been out there every day, 30, 40 days in a row. You kind of have it dialed in. So listen and try your best and slow down, right? Slow that bait down a little bit.
Yeah. Or a lot of times it's speed up.
Speed up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're throwing that swim bait and you're dragging it on the bottom, you're coming with moss.
Right.
Pick up the pace a little bit.
Exactly. Well, good stuff. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast to wrap up this season. I wish the best of luck for you in the future. How can people follow and keep up with what you're doing, as well as book a trip with you?
I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram under NY North Country Bassin. And, I've got a website, nynorthcountrybassin.com. And, my phone number is all over there too.
Sure. Awesome. We're going to put all that information down below. And if anyone's interested, get up there. It's definitely worth it. It's an amazing place, beautiful scenery, and a lot of big fish. And Bill's the guy to get it done when it comes to smallmouth fishing. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Travis.
Awesome. And as always, guys, until next time, we'll see you on the water.
Thanks so much for listening today. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show and follow us on Instagram at SmallmouthCrush. Also, the YouTube channel, SmallmouthCrush. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and comment with a review below. And as always, until next time, we'll see you on the water.